Man turned in 50 years worth of pennies, and what he got back shocked everyone. David Miller was cleaning out his late grandfather Harold's shed in rural Tennessee when he stumbled on old coffee tins, crates, and dusty bags, each packed with pennies. Some were rolled, others loose, and even old sacks stamped by 1970s banks. In a locked metal box, he found letters from Harold explaining how he'd been saving pennies since 1969 as a backup plan during tough times. Realizing the stash could be valuable, David contacted a few banks, but none could handle that many coins. So he called in coin collectors, and that's when things got interesting. Hidden among the mess were ultra-rare pennies, including a 1944 steel cent. Experts spent weeks sorting and grading the haul. David stood in his grandfather's old shed, still dusty from the boxes of pennies they had just finished loading into his truck. But even with the initial excitement, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more, something Harold hadn't revealed in those letters. That night, David returned home and stayed up until 2 a.m., scrolling through coin collector forums, watching videos about rare finds, and trying to understand just how much potential value he was sitting on. The next morning, he drove 2 hours to meet with a retired coin dealer named Mr. Aldridge, who had spent 40 years working with historical coins. When David opened the first crate, Mr. Aldridge raised his eyebrows and muttered, "You weren't kidding." They spent hours going through the coins. Most were common, but every few minutes, Aldridge would pause and quietly set one aside without saying a word. By the end of the day, Aldridge had a small velvet tray with just 12 coins. He handed it to David and said, "These alone might change your life." David stared at them. What looked like plain old pennies suddenly felt like ancient artifacts. One of them was a 1909 SVDB Lincoln cent, one of the rarest ever minted. Another was a 1943 bronze penny. Only a handful were known to exist. But the real shock came when Aldridge picked up a penny with faded edges and flipped it under his magnifier. His hand trembled slightly. "This," he whispered, "this is not supposed to exist." David leaned in. It was a 1959 D Wheat reverse penny, an error so rare most believed it to be a myth. Only one verified copy had ever surfaced before. Aldridge looked him dead in the eye and said, "You need to get this graded, immediately, and don't tell anyone you have it." David's heart was pounding. He hadn't expected this. What started as cleaning a dusty shed now felt like he was holding a national treasure. Over the next few days, David took the coins to be authenticated by the PCGS, the Professional Coin Grading Service. He waited nervously, constantly refreshing his email. When the results came in, he nearly dropped his phone. The 1909 SVDB was a genuine MS-66. The 1943 bronze cent graded at AU 58, but the 1959 D Wheat reverse, verified, genuine, possibly the second known copy in existence. Suddenly, the news broke. Someone from the grading company had leaked it to a coin blog. Overnight, David's inbox exploded. Emails from collectors, journalists, even museums poured in. One message simply read, "Name your price." He felt overwhelmed. What had started as a family memory was now a spotlight he wasn't ready for. He called his sister Ellie and told her everything. She didn't speak at first. Then she asked, "Did Grandpa know?" David wasn't sure. Maybe Harold never knew what he had. Or maybe he did and left the clues for David to find on purpose. Trying to protect the collection, David placed the most valuable coins in a secure bank deposit box. But he still had thousands left unsorted. That's when he got a call from the Mid-South Numismatic Society. They'd heard about his story and offered to help free of charge. The next weekend, David drove to their event center, where volunteers spent 3 straight days cataloging coin after coin. By the end, they had found not just rare pennies, but mint-condition silver coins mistakenly rolled into penny wrappers, war-era error coins, and even a colonial copper dated 1787. Some were dirty and rusted, others pristine, but in the final box, a wooden cigar box with a false bottom, they discovered something strange. Not coins, but 2 faded envelopes. Inside were photos of Harold in uniform, standing in front of a tank in Germany. The other envelope contained ration cards, a military medal, and a folded American flag. A small note read, "If you're reading this, I hope you found something more valuable than money." David sat there, frozen. It hit him Harold hadn't just been collecting coins. He had been preserving pieces of a life. His life, a quiet legacy stored in pennies and boxes. The story made national headlines. News crews visited David's house. A documentary crew reached out, but he declined most offers. He didn't want to turn this into a circus. 1 month later, a man named Gregory Samuels, a private collector who'd once bought a $1 million dime, asked to meet in person. In a quiet restaurant booth, he made David an offer, not just for the rare pennies, but for the entire collection. Every crate, every bag, every coin. David hesitated. He'd spent so much time with the collection, it felt like part of Harold was still alive through it. Then Samuel slid over a check. David looked at it and nearly dropped it. The number had 8 zeros. He didn't respond, just stared. Then Samuel said, "You don't have to decide today, but just know, I won't be the last to ask." David walked out that night with the check still in his pocket, unsigned. When he got home, he sat in the shed, the same place he found the first bag of pennies. He looked around at the shelves, the jars, the old lanterns. Everything still smelled like Harold. Then he smiled. Not because of the money, but because in a world chasing digital everything, his grandfather had left behind something tangible, something real, not just coins, but a story, a journey. And maybe, David thought, that was worth more than anything.